Hi there folks, in the beautiful if unseasonable late February weather here in Bulgaria, we have 15 degrees centigrade today, which is pretty weird for late February, but we gotta make the best of it. So I decided to start my grafting season. The grafting season is a pretty big deal to me. I try to do as much graft as possible in the garden and in the fields around each year, usually doing a couple or a few dozen, but this year I'll be aiming for more than 100. I have big plans for the season, and I wanted to take you along for the first graft this year, which I'll be making on this young but nicely growing cherry tree. So the story behind this tree is that I bought it as a super early ripening variety, so we can have cherries in the very early June, maybe even late May. But probably in the nursery they made a mistake while grafting, because this tree, first of all, it took 6 years to produce flower buds, which was really unusual. Usually they make flower buds on the third year at the most. And then the cherries which it made, they were not particularly good, and not early at all. In fact, they ripened a bit late, and they didn't have a very pleasing taste. So I'm wondering if this tree here was not grafted at all. It may be a wild seedling, or someone made a big mistake while grafting. But anyhow, I'm trying to make the best of it. So you can see that it's growing nice and straight. I have already created simple structure here to allow to make it easier to graft in the future, because I have decided that I'll be changing its variety. And yesterday I cut those two branches, which I'll be grafting today. And maybe later this year or in the next years, I'll be removing those side branches and grafting here as well, in order to create 3 or maybe 4 variety cherry, plus a special type of sour cherry, which I'll be talking about in a minute. So let's get going. Now, first of all, I wanted to talk a bit about the tools which I'm using. As you probably know by now, if you watch my channel, I usually use the most affordable, cheapest tools that work okay. I won't be buying any junk just because it's very cheap, but usually I'm looking for a solution which works nice enough for my needs, and it's still not very expensive, because we always operate on a very tight budget. So usually most of my cuts for pruning are done with the regular pruners, and sometimes the wart size ones. If I'm using orchard saw or pruning saw, I usually use a folding one, because it's way easier to carry and more safe. And also this length of about 15 centimeters is much more than I need for most of the cuts which I'm making. And then for the actual grafting, I use 2 types of knives. I probably be getting a lot of online hate for that, but my most convenient and best way to graft tool is a box knife. There is a bit of a twist here. This is an alpha knife, Japanese made, and I'm using special blades with the signature LWB, which in their picture they look like it's a serrated blade, but it's not really serrated. It's a straight edge blade, but one of the sides has this wave like pattern, which makes it way easier to cut pliable soft tissue material such as the scions and the rootstocks. And those blades are made for cutting soft PVC pipes and linoleum and other stuff that it's bendy. This makes it way easier to cut. You can't break away pieces of it, so if you break the blade somehow, you have to buy another one. But I think that a couple of those blades in one of those boxes here sells for like €4. and one of those blades is easily hundreds of grafts if you don't break it. My last year blade, it broke because I dropped the knife on the ground, so I have to load a new one now. And usually when I'm grafting, I'm using much of the length of the blade. So at first I was trying to use those breakaway blades, but when I'm grafting and I'm doing this motion, I need more length to the blade. So in a few dozen experiments, I found out that the breakaway blades start breaking away easily when applying pressure. And I researched some and found out that some of the local guys who graft around here, they use those blades, and I'm very pleased with them. Another thing which I used last year is this of a knife. It's a craft knife. It has a bit thicker blade, which works great if you have thicker rootstock and thicker scion. Very solid construction, stainless steel, brass tightening knob. But this is already this has already done many grafts, and it's not sharp enough, and I will demonstrate now how to check if the sharpness of the blade is good enough for you to use for grafting. So even if the blade has some sharpness to it and you can do some cuts, one of the tests for how sharp a blade is when you take some of the bark off and you try to skim the edge of the bark. Remove just a tiny sliver of bark here. You can see how the bark starts it gets rough on top, and it does not cleanly cut the bark and the cambium. It still has some life in it, and I can still use it for crafts or around the garden, but that's not clean cut enough for a good graft. And I'll just quickly compare that to the blade which I just installed. You can see how smoothly it cuts the bark, and you can cut very cleanly, very thin pieces. Compare this and this edge. You can see it's a very nice cut and a large difference. So this also has replacement blades. I don't have any of those, and for this reason I won't be grafting with this tool, but this is still very useful if you're doing cleft grafts, because this is a very rigid blade and you can stick it here and apply pressure on the top, or even you know, pound like with a mallet or something to just make the cleft, because this won't break easily. But if you try to do that with a thinner blade, just striking here on top is most likely to break the blade. So I advise against that. For tightening all of the grafts I make, I use this clear, I know it looks green, but when you unroll it, it's actually clear biodegradable plastic, which works great because even if I forget to remove the plastic, it just falls off and degrades in the course of the season or in the winter at the latest. So this is very nice if you're doing grafts which are not nearby and you don't always have chance to return and service those grafts in time. In the future I want to buy another special type of tape, which is very like a rubber band, which is very expandable, but this came free to me and the other ones are not as cheap, so I'll be using that one until it runs out. For the all the cuts I make, I use this simple, I know it looks a bit weird, but this is a box of paste which I have for maybe 10 years now. It's a type of grafting wax which is made of pine resin and beeswax. It smells very nice. You can use it as an air freshener in your car actually, and the only problem with it is that it has to be warm in order to be workable, otherwise it's a bit brittle. But now the weather is sunny, so it works very well to just keep it open in the sun, and it's soft enough to be applied like one of those putty or like a plasticine paste on top of the cut. This thing is biodegradable as well, It has no plastic additives and no fungicides as some of the more professional pastes have, but I like how it works and I have great success with it, so I'll be using it until it runs out. I just realized that the neighbors' hens are laying their eggs at this time of day and they're being very vocal about it, so I hope you don't mind that. And now I wanted to show you the cyan wood which I'll be using. Wow, one of the first bees for the season. They must be lured out by the warm weather. So this here is the growth tip of a special type of sour cherry, and I cut the whole tip so I can harvest many scions. This is a 2-year-old growth up to this point, and all those side branches are 1-year growth, so all of the side branches can be used for scion. And of course I don't need as many, but still I'm cutting them all, and I'll be saving them because someone else might want a scion. This is a bit too thin for my taste, so that probably won't be used, but anyway, each of those pieces, each of those branches, 1-year-old branches which I grew, is enough for many scions. You usually need 2 to 4 buds in order to graft, and if you remove those while making the cuts, you're still left with 2 buds which are enough for developing good scion. 3 buds is okay with the more vigorous growing plant, so this one I can easily make like 3 or 4 scions out of it, and I already have 8 sticks or something, so this is easily over 20 scions. And if you have a choice, such as in my case, I prefer to be using the branch which grows vertically at the top, in this case this one, because it has the most vigor to it and it's usually the thickest. This is the second thickest. You can see that they have similar diameter. Another thing which I try to use sometimes is use the tip buds, which means that when I'm grafting, I'm not taking this piece and having a cut here which I have to use the grafting wax on, but I'm using this piece, so I have terminal buds on the top, which some people advise against, but all my grafts with this type of bud have developed better than the ones which were cut here. And this type of graft with the terminal bud on top will promote more forward upward growth quicker, while those type of graft using this type of scion will promote more like branching behavior, so you can pick and choose depending on your context and your needs. Finally, this type of plant, this type of cherry, it's a type of it's a hybrid or a natural, I think it's a natural hybrid, which is in Bulgarian called vishnap, which is similar to the world vishna, which is sour cherry, but this is not as sour and not as tart as the sour cherry. You can easily eat it fresh, similar to cherries, so it's a mix of cherry but not too sweet, with very little sweetness to it but still some sweetness, and very pleasant sourness without being tart. And it's great fresh eating, super refreshing. It also combines great with cherries, so if you have cherries and vishnap at the same time, you can eat them both and compare. And it's also a very hardy and resilient tree, which in many occasions grows through from seed. But this came from a tree which I've tasted the fruit last year. I liked them, so I went and gathered some this growing tip, this branch. The tree needed maintenance either way, so I did a service to the person who is the owner of the trees by doing a quick trim and then collecting some scion wood. Hi there. So now on to the most interesting part. You can see down here in my shade the pile of branches which I removed while prepping this tree for the grafting, and this is the branch on which I'll be grafting my first 2 scions. I cut the tops with the terminal butt of the two of the scions which I collected, which I just showed you. And now I'll be doing what I think is the simplest graft of all, the cleft graft. It's very easy to make, and even if you start working and there's a problem which appears like you split too far or something, you can always cut a bit lower and restart. This is the reason which I'm leaving a bit more here. And as I made this cut yesterday, this part of the bark and the cambium has already started to dry out a bit. So every time, even when I'm prepped, I do a new cut, install the scions, and then wrap it up and paste it so it doesn't dry out, which will ensure a better chance of getting the scions to take. Okay, so now I'm doing a fresh cut here. Okay, that's good enough. Now what I'm going to do is clean the edge a bit by, it's like sharpening a pencil, just slightly, to make a more smooth and even edge of the bark and the cambium here, which limits the chances of fungal or other infections. I'm not always as meticulous as I'm now showing you, but when I have the time and I'm not in a rush, I try to do things as cleanly as possible. So now I have to do a split in order to insert the scions. Always think about the direction of the split which you'll be doing, and it's important in order to save you some work in the future. If I do the split this way and put two scions here and here, this will direct the growth in unfavorable directions, because this one branch will be growing towards this one, and I much rather have them grow like that to use more of a north-south direction. And those two I'll be making in an off angle for the other branch, but here I'll be making them in that direction. So think about where the branches and the future crown is going when doing the split. I can use this knife going straight through the center, so make a diameter, and just pound it with a stick or something. Or if you don't have a similar knife, you can also use your pruners to make the cut. It really helps if they are sharp. So what you need to do is have this blade wedged in at a few centimeters of depth, so you can see that there's this cleft opening here in the branch, like that. It's not perfectly straight along the branch, but that's not a big problem. And then you can use the blade to pry this open, or if the blade is thicker and you don't have anything else appropriate, you can use a screwdriver, which also works great. And if you don't have even that at hand, you can just use your grafting knife or something to make this just very simple wedge out of a piece of the branches which you just cut, and use that to pry open the cleft which you just made. Now for the scions themselves, there are many ways to prep this for the cleft graft. The easiest is to just make this type of shape and just insert here. Another is to make like a section of the circle, but it's a bit harder to make. And the main aim, this is what you have to remember when doing all grafts is that you need the cambium, this green layer here, right underneath the bark, to align with the cambium of the scion which you are putting. So the scion must not stick out of the branch, and it must not be put deeper here. The two barks and the two cambium layers, they have to align. Another thing to know, which is very important, is that buds which are closer to the graft are most likely to develop first. So even if some of the buds above don't take and then they dry out and don't develop, those buds are most likely to develop. So I'm trying to usually use a bud which is close to the graft and do my scion prep here as close to the bud as possible. So I'll be doing just a few very simple cuts here to just sharpen a bit the edge of that scion. You can see that I'm not applying much pressure to the scion. There's no much force needed when the edge is sharp. And now take note how the two barks align perfectly here as I'm inserting the scion. If you want to be a bit better situated, you can make like this T shape at the top, which will sit at the top of the cut which we made. This is not absolutely needed, but it's good to have it if you can manage it. Those little T shapes, and they're like a stopper which will show you where to stop driving the scion again. So now I'm using my wedge to make a little bit wider opening so I can drive the scion wood fully, like that. Make sure the barks are aligned, the cambium layers. And now I'll have to start doing the other one. The trick here is to make the two scions with similar thickness, so when you remove the wedge in the middle, the branch will compress back, and if one of the scions is thicker, the other will fall out. So they have to be with similar thickness after you have inserted them in their place. The cleft graft is the first graft type which I tried, but I have a little bit of a problem with it because it requires for you to split a branch like this, and for my taste that's a bit of a too much intervention. Of course it's useful in certain contexts, but in many times I prefer to use a thinner branch and just shape the crown later instead of doing a thicker branch on a cleft graft. And then I most of the time use whip and tongue graft. You can see how I shape the scion here with the little T on the top. So now that I already have this one keeping the wound open, I can slowly pull my wedge out and then gradually insert the other scion. You can see that the scions are touching and those buds are touching. This is not a problem. I just remove the buds. I have enough buds here to develop in those directions and even the terminal buds. And then I'll be coming in mid-June, July to shape that if needed. And in many years it's possible that those two branches will just fuse in a single stem. We'll see. But you can do a cleft graft with way thinner cyan wood. I have done it with as thin as a skewer. It's a less percentage chance of taking, but it still works. I have done this with medwards on hawthorn and it works. So now the main problem with this type of graft. The problem is that you're getting this massive wound here and it is just inviting water and insects inside of the structure of the tree, which is not which is a problematic. So I use my wedge, which I used from a second ago, to drive some of the grafting wax deeper in that crevice, in that cleft which I just created, and then with my fingers I spray it around the edge of the cambium and the bark to prevent quicker drying, to give some time for the wound to heal. I just spray it around. And I also put some on the outside of the cleft where the cambiums meet, just in case, because this is an open wound after all, and trees need their wounds dressed similar way to as we do. And then when I'm ready with this, I like that it smells great and it's not toxic, it's not problematic for my hands. Always after I'm grafting, my hands smell great. Now I'm using the tape. There's nothing special here, just wrap it tightly around. You have to start, you have to encompass all of the cut, not leave any small openings here. And if the tape breaks, just restart it. No need to apply much pressure. The cleft graft is most of the time pressurized enough from the internal pressure of the structure of the tree to keep it closed, but I think that it helps a bit to tighten it and close it. And now I just put a tiny bit on top for extra protection. And this also allows for the grafting wax to not dry out very quickly and crack. So that's about it. Our first cleft graft for the season is done. Now for this other branch I won't be doing cleft grafting, and I wanted to show you a couple of things. First of all, those are all pieces of the same branch. I took the top and put it here, and I can take 2 or 3 more scions out of it, so reusing is best. Secondly, when you're using a scion with a cut top, you have to put grafting wax on top, and also always aim to have a cut slanting away from the butt which you'll be using. Similarly, those cuts, you can see that they're slanted. The idea is afterwards, if there is rainfall or snow, the water should be running off away from the cut and not standing here on top, because that leads to rotting. So okay, so my gimbal battery died, and then my phone battery died, so I take that as a sign and cut this clip short. I'm just showing you how I did the graft here, and that will be all for today. So this is the ready dressed graft. Just 2 details here. Those are side grafted. I will probably show you that in another video, because I'll be making lots of those grafts. It's just crudely speaking, attaching the scion to the side of the branch by scraping some of the branch bark away in the similar elliptical shape as the one which you cut the scion wood in. And I wrapped the whole thing in the biodegradable plastic film, applied some of the grafting wax where I decided that some water might come in, and then I waxed the tops of the two cuts and deliberately left 4 butts on this one and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 butts on the other one, just to see how they develop, to compare. This one is thicker and this one is thinner, this is taller. I just wanted to see how they develop, and I usually, judging on which of the butts develop most vigorously, come and snip them out and shape the whole thing uh, during the early growth season, so it has time to properly develop in the first summer. So that was all for today, and I'm sure I'll be shooting lots of other grafting videos in the coming weeks. See you guys.